In this video I'm going to be discussing heavy weapons teams again, this time the anti-tank element. I'm going to be going from anti-tank rifles through to anti-tank guided missiles. A lot of this stuff is very outdated, has not been current issue in decades, but in the US a lot of this stuff is still in the hands of private collectors, so it will appear on a battlefield. And even on battlefields in Syria and Ukraine, you'll see some of these weapon systems appearing on there, and it surprises people watching the videos because they say they're museum pieces. How could they be on a battlefield? Well, you use what you can get a hold of. Now, first off will be anti-tank rifles. The first one I'm going to mention is the British Boys anti-tank rifle. It was a 55 caliber rifle, so if you do purchase one that has not been modified in the US, you have to have the same types of permits that you do for an automatic weapon, because it is considered a destructive device because it's over 50 caliber. There are Boys anti-tank rifles in the US that were rebarreled, rechambered for US 50 caliber BMG. Those fall under the same rules as your Barrett 50 calibers. Now, according to the British, the Boys only required one person, but I did find in doctrine they had a two-person crew assigned to them at times. One person was a gunner, one person was the loader. It was fed with a 5-round magazine. The British issued them as one anti-tank rifle to a platoon in the infantry company, and I found reference that in the anti-aircraft section of the infantry battalion they had 4 anti-tank rifles assigned to it also. Next we have from Finland the Lahti L39. It's a 20 millimeter anti-tank rifle, had a 2-person crew, a gunner and a loader, was fed with a 10-round magazine. These weapons are in the hands of collectors in the US, but the ammunition is extremely hard to find. Now, next examples, and I put these on here because I've seen these a lot in footage out of the Ukraine, and they've also appeared in Syria. The PTRD from Russia and the PTRS-41. Both are chambered for 14.5 millimeter. The BTRD was bolt action, so it was single shot. The PTRS used a 5-round magazine because it was semi-automatic. They had a 2-person crew of a gunner and a loader, or an ammunition bearer in the case of the PTRD. Now, with the Russians, in their heavy weapons platoons, they had one anti-tank section which had a minimum of 3 anti-tank rifles. With Finland, during the Winter War and the Continuation War, they had 1 anti-tank section per infantry company according to doctrine, and in each section they carried 4 Lahtis. Now, anti-tank rifles, you're not going to find a lot of them, so you're probably not going to have squads and sections assigned with nothing but those. You'll probably come across them in 1s and 2s. Well, assign them to a platoon or at your company level for use as anti-helicopter weapons, and also against light vehicles and light armor, like armored personnel carriers. Anti-tank guns. In the United States, the one that I see the most in videos at shoots across the US is the M1, which was a 57 millimeter anti-tank gun. It had a 6-person crew, 1 NCO, a gunner, the assistant gunner, 2 loaders, and 1 driver. They were issued 1 platoon of 3 guns per infantry battalion. They were kept primarily in the rear and used only in the defense, like at roadblocks and defending cities. It's a World War II era weapon. Each round of ammunition, a 57 millimeter, weighs between 6 to 7 pounds each. Now with Russia, I list the MT-12 and the T-12. The MT-12 is the improved version of the T-12. I've seen a lot of footage of these appearing in the Ukraine. It's a 100 millimeter anti-tank gun. Had a 6 or 7 person crew. 6 person if it was a T-12, 7 person if it was the MT-12, according to the doctrine I found. You had the gun commander, the layer or the gunner, a loader, 2 ammunition handlers, and 1 driver who would assist the ammunition handlers. Each round for this anti-tank gun weighs between 42 and 60 pounds each. Now next, I will cover recoilless rifles. I'll cover primarily just 2 types. The US M40, which was a 106 millimeter, but in actuality the ammunition was 105 meter. They called it 106 meter because there was issues with the previous weapon system, which was a 105, and they didn't want people to get confused between the 2 weapons for some reason. Now, this weapon system was primarily mounted on a Jeep, and it had a gunner, a loader, both of them who rode in back of a Jeep, the driver, and then an NCO that was in charge of the crew. Each round of 106 millimeter weighed 17 to 21 pounds each, depending on the type. Now for Russia, I list the SPG-9. It is considered out of date and has been pulled from service, but there is lots of them appearing in the Ukraine, in Syria, and other hotspots around the world. You see them typically mounted on the backs of light trucks or technicals. It is a 73 millimeter weapon. The Russians recommended a 2-person crew of a gunner and a loader, and each round weighed 9 to 15 pounds each. Now I recommend, if you get a hold of recoilless rifles, and there are plenty of them in the US, I've even heard rumors of sheriff's departments in some of the western states and up in Michigan that have recoilless rifles that they've gotten from the federal government over the years. I recommend for the crew, you have a gunner, a loader, a driver who's also an ammunition handler, and an NCO that's in overall charge of the crew. Now for anti-tank guided missiles, these are, you would find these in the platoons, even in infantry platoons, in the case of the Milan and the Russian weapon systems. But I list them here in case you do go with an anti-tank weapon in your heavy weapons elements, your heavy weapons platoon, heavy weapons company, so you get an idea of the organization you should have. Now for the US, you have the TOW missile. The missile itself is the BGM-71. The US Army recommends a 3-person crew of an NCO, a gunner, driver for the vehicle who also doubles as the loader. Each missile, depending on which series it is, weighs between 41 and 50 pounds each. Now in Europe, you have the French Milan, which was used by many armies in Europe. That's why I listed it as Europe. That is a 2-person crew of a gunner and a loader, and each missile weighs 15 pounds each. That's probably the most deployed missile around the world, probably more than even the TOW. Now the next weapon systems I list are the AT-5 Spandrel and the AT-13 Saxhorn II. Both of these weapon systems have appeared in Ukraine and Syria. With the AT-13, I'm seeing a lot more of those on the battlefield in the video footage I've seen. Both of them have a crew of 3 people, the commander or NCO, the gunner, and an ammunition bearer. Now I came across a note with the AT-13. The gunner will carry the weapon system and 1 missile. The NCO and the ammunition bearer both carry 2 missiles each, so each crew carries on average 5 missiles. The AT-5 Spandrel, each missile weighs 55 to 57 pounds each. They cut that weight drastically when they created the AT-13 system. Each missile weighs only 30 pounds each. Now, like with any other heavy weapons element, I recommend that they have wheeled transport, whether it's a Gator, a Jeep, or a light truck. Because in the case of the anti-tank guns, you have a towed weapon system. With the recoilless rifles, you can carry them on the ground, but they will get heavy, so it's better that they're mounted on a vehicle and they can bug out faster. The anti-tank guided missiles, with the tow, it can be ground mounted, but it's highly recommended according to US doctrine that it be vehicle mounted, because you'll fire your 1 shot and you'll bug out to your next firing position. With the Milan and the AT-5, AT-13, they are typically dismounted crews, but they can mount them on the tops of vehicles. This is just to give you some information if you're considering an anti-tank element in your heavy weapons platoons or companies. Now, for all my engineer brothers in the Patriot and Militia movement, always remember, essayons.